You know what? Let me throw up the first super chat of the day, and I'm going to throw it up on the screen. This is something I'm going to try and do more often. Is kind of give credit where credit is due, because people don't have to give us anything, and they do. And the first super chat of the day comes away of J Mac in the chat. He's a good friend of the channel, has been for years. This is a phenomenal point, and it's a great jumping off point, if you will. Instead of being an ambassador for the good of gaming, he continues to fuel console rhetoric, shameful for his position and sad. Indeed, J Mac, and thank you so much for the generosity, brother. Look, I have a couple of stories pulled here. Again, I'm going to read the stories. I want to tell you where they're from, and then we're going to attack this. It's going to be an open-ended conversation because everyone on this panel here is a paraprofessional podcaster. So however they want to take this conversation, it is going to be pointed. It is going to be regarding the articles that I do have pulled, but it's going to be open-ended. And I really want to get the chat involved in this because, again, I think J Mac brings up a phenomenal point. I think someone of his leadership stature, I understand he's no longer a boss for Sony Interactive Entertainment, more specifically PlayStation. I get that. But he's still an ambassador of gaming. And every time Sean Layden opens his mouth, he puts his foot in it. And he's fueling the console war rhetoric. And I understand that, it for him, maybe it's blue versus green, right? And for a lot of people in this chat, blue versus green, it matters. Console war talk and conversation matters. It still does. I think the console war is over. You heard me say this yesterday. Not only do I believe it's over, I believe Xbox won. Xbox won because of what I said yesterday, and I'll reiterate it for the class that wasn't here, that took the day off. They won because right now, 6 of the top-selling games in Sony's top 10 are Xbox games. That's how you win the console war. You can't beat them, join them. And they did join PlayStation, and now PlayStation gamers, not the trolls, not the stands, not the effing a-holes, the actual PlayStation gamers, which are in this chat right now, which we love hanging out with and having great conversations with, those gamers are enjoying Xbox games. Why? Because they don't have an Xbox. Maybe they don't have access to a redonkulous type of PC. But what they do have, and what they've been supporting maybe since the PS4, is PlayStation. And some of these gamers were Xbox 360 gamers and that were moved over because of price. And now they stayed a PlayStation gamer. So now they're winning. That's how you win the console war. And Xbox is putting their games everywhere. And not only are they putting their games everywhere, but you can play their games anywhere, which is, again, winning the console war, right? But, again, I don't want to go down. That's a conversation we're going to continue to have. We got to get into what Sean Layden had to say. And here's one of them. This is an article that I pulled from GameSpot.com. Now, I normally don't pull their articles because some of their journalists are ridiculous. But it's an important part of today's conversation because it's one of the key points I want to kind of point out. The title of the article says, Xbox at a Sega-like fork in the road and may stop making consoles, ex-PlayStation boss says. And it has a quote here from Sean Layden. I don't think their hardware offering is persuasive enough to make that up the ground that they have lost. And he goes on to say, now, the original article or the interview was with GI.biz. Now, the reason why I'm not using them specifically is because it is written like the Wall Street Journal. And it's a good read. It's a phenomenal read. I am going to, for the sake of talking about their article, going to add it to the show notes. So if you want to click on it and read it, by all means, please do. But it will be in the show notes. And part of this article is referring to what he said in this interview. It says, speaking to GI.biz, Layden said, there will certainly be more console generations to come, but Microsoft may not be a part of that story. In quotes, watching what Xbox has been doing recently, I do get Dreamcast flashbacks, referring to how Sega got out of the console business after the Dreamcast failed and they became a software company. And he goes on to say, and again, this is Sean Layden, I quote, I think Sega realized that they were just better off being a software house. I think Microsoft is in that same sort of fork in the road. And I don't think that their hardware offering is persuasive enough to make up the ground that they've lost. Now, folks, look, I don't have a business degree. I do have in front of me in a very nice plaque a degree in common sense, right? And I'm very proud of it. I worked real hard to get it. It's right here, right? You can't see it because it's in front of me. It's fine. The problem with this statement and why I consider it to be almost unbelievably reckless is it was announced last month that AMD and Xbox have signed a strategic partnership that's going to go into a decade worth of partnership, right? That's a lock and solid contract. They have already announced hardware that is going to come in the form factor of their own Microsoft branded hardware, which is expected in 2027 in two forms, just like this current generation, an S and an X, but not in name, just in the way that they're going to have two SKUs. There is going to be a very powerful magic box underneath your TV that's going to be open source. It's going to be the first of its kind for home consoles by platform maker, right? There's also rumored to be a handheld, a dockable handheld that's going to be very Switch-like. Now, those are rumors, folks, but we have heard it time and time again. You've heard me talk about it. But next year is going to be the first time in Xbox history. And if you add PlayStation and Nintendo, it's going to be the first time in platform history, not counting the 3DO with Panasonic and what they did, but in just the three bigs, an OEM device that is going to be Xbox branded, but made by someone else other than Microsoft, probably Asus. Simply, I say that with just, again, it's common sense, folks. They've already worked with them on the handheld that's coming out later this year. That's going to be unveiled in a big way at Gamescom next week. But this new OEM device is going to be the first of its kind for the big three, right? So Xbox is going to get a jump on it. Is that hardware? Well, shit, I think it is. And so he's already wrong. But that's not the only story, ladies and gentlemen. This one is the one that gets me. Look, I said this in the green room, ladies and gentlemen. I am a retired man who worked a very violent job. And thankfully, I came out unscathed and I never hurt anybody in my 21 plus years. And it makes me really proud that that's the police officer that I was, right? As I am now is exactly how I was in uniform. Very, very Ferdinand the Bull. Now, if you don't know who Ferdinand the Bull is, it's one of my favorite childhood books. Ferdinand was a bull from Spain that all he wanted to do was smell his flowers under his shady tree. Until one day, a bee stung him in the ass and he became enraged and the town became afraid of him because they wanted him to bullfight. And he didn't want to fight. That's like me. I don't want to fight with anybody. And I don't want to fight with the industry. But I am going to tell you that, again, my whole long-winded point is that I don't get mad at stuff that happens in the industry. Because, one, I can't control it, and B, it's not that serious. Though there is one particular point that pisses me off more. This is where Dark Boom, this is where the horns come out. And this is pointed at just more than Sean Layden. Not that he has anything to do with this conversation, but I look at like Mike Ybarra. He says things that are idiotic. And my whole point is, Crispy, Fuzzy, you said it. How dare these millionaires tell us that games should be more, or that services like Xbox Game Pass shouldn't exist because somehow they're hurting the big picture of profits for gaming. Now, I don't curse, and I'm not going to, but F you guys. And I'm not talking about the chat. I'm talking about Sean Layden, the Mike Ybarras, and the types like them. These are millionaires with a lot of zeros in their bank accounts. How effing dare they try to tell me that I, as the consumer, should not be celebrating Game Pass, that it shouldn't exist because profits are down for companies and development costs are up. That's not my effing problem. That's your effing problem. But you know what's interesting? The big point of that, prices should go up and Game Pass shouldn't exist, and companies are not making as much profits as it's a thin line of profit to spending. Oh well, figure it out. The big problem with when they talk in riddles like that, because that's ultimately what it is they don't mention, Crispy Bomb, the big elephant in the room, and that's free-to-play games. Free-to-play games are eating the industry's lunch. It's not because of Game Pass that Spider-Man 2 was $315 million to make. Was it? No. Was it because of Game Pass that Donkey Kong was $70 and Mario Kart was $80? Is that Game Pass's fault? It is certainly not. The industry has to make up their money somehow, and they decided that they should raise prices in games. And they raised prices in games for two reasons. One, they have to combat higher budgets, right? That's the world we're living in. But also, they have to account for someone buying a console and not buying their software because they bought the console for Fortnite, for Apex Legends, for Warzone, for Roblox, or Minecraft. Those are the top 5 bigs, but no one ever mentions that. Crispy, I want to go to you this because, again, Sean Layden had a lot of things to say. There is no right or wrong way to start and end this conversation, but I want to get your thoughts on this.
Dreamcast came out in America in 1999.
Yes.
How many gosh darn years is that? Think about it. It's about 26 years, people. Why is he bringing that up? Microsoft is not the same company as Sega. Microsoft is a $1 trillion company, multi-trillion dollar company. They make software, okay, that can go to these devices that we're talking about, these OEM devices. If it's Asus, Lenovo, I mean, shoot, the way it's looking, maybe Apple's going to come out with something that is gaming related that can run Game Pass. We don't know. If you got TVs that can run, I don't have to even use my Xbox Series X. And I'm going to be honest with you. They never, re-announced that the cloud is working, but I'm going to tell you right now, even if I boot up my Series X, I have games in there that are cloud-based that work pretty darn good. I'm going to be honest with you. They are quietly doing back-end things like they always have done. It just so happens that they're trying to integrate their breadwinner at the end of the day, and that's Windows. And that's where I say, like, they look at it in a landscape, like, almost like a PC-like landscape. Like, I have a Surface sitting in front of me, and they're still making Surfaces, people. They still make them. They take their time with it. They have all these other companies that are making stuff for them. This is the world we're going to live in at some point. It's not saying that Xbox ecosystem is going to disappear. If anything, it could be reinvigorated into a new ecosystem that involves other storefronts, just like a PC itself. And it's not that hard to think about. We are so far away from his reference points that it's absolutely ridiculous to even have that comparison. Okay, Sega is doing great. We're not taking that away from them. What I'm saying is they had a choice at that time of what to do. We are talking 26 years later about Sega Dreamcast. Come on, Sean. You got to get your head out of your you-know-what and understand that the world has changed in 26 years, buddy. Not only that, that man He works for Tencent. Now, if you look at how they purchase things, they do it very shadily. They will put, a 30%. They'll take 30% from Sony. They'll take 20% from Embracer. I'm sure there's some kind of like investment in that too. Okay. They do things very, shadily, as I like to call it. And this is where I say, okay, you're calling Game Pass to the forefront. What has Game Pass really done? It hasn't hurt nobody. Okay. Consumer wise, oh, I love it. Like, I had somebody put out a tweet and say, oh, you Xbox gamers don't have a library. Oh, really? Really now? I probably have more games than you, buddy. And that's because when I want my games, I get them. Okay. I get them, I love Gears. Will I play a campaign in Halo? Absolutely. Do I dabble in a Forza? Absolutely. Am I gonna just download Outer Worlds 2 into Game Pass? And I can do that, but that doesn't mean I don't buy games. That doesn't mean that I don't add that, because when you add that extra little tier that they give you in, the $20-$30 in Game Pass, you own the game now. People don't realize that. You own the game, okay? And it's never going to leave anyway, and they only do it really with Xbox games. But in realism, like, hey, like, I'm preview in Grounded 1, okay? I bought the preview in Grounded 1. Guess what? I own the game. It's in my library, all right? Preservation of library is the only concern I have as far as what Xbox does. But this man is out here acting like smaller devs can't make something great, and then it can, have its way. Just 6 months, it goes into the ecosystems of all, like a Ninja Gaiden 4. I truly believe that's going to sell really well as well across all platforms. But it's in Game Pass. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't think the game happens without Microsoft's backing.
And that's been confirmed. Like, both games, Ninja Gaiden 2 Black would not exist, as well as Ninja Gaiden 4, if it wasn't for Microsoft and Xbox putting their foot forward. That's confirmed, dude.
If you look at the landscape, it's much different. And we're going to get into other comments. But, like Netflix, like everybody says, oh, they're one of the richest companies in the world, but yet they make no profit. They've been making profit for a couple of years now, people. I'm just telling you, they've been very pointed in what they're doing. And this is where, like, the artist part of it drives me crazy. These artists, there's a lot of big names in some of these shows or movies or anything else. Literally, like, just watching some of the old school wrestling stuff from Netflix has gotten me back into wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm talking years upon years, like, Attitude Era when I was at. These are things that are happening, and I think they're having more medium and more ability to say, hey, like, you know what? We didn't sell what we could, but if we release it in Game Pass, take that bag, whatever it may be. Maybe it's a percentage. Phil always says they're very agnostic with how they, if that company wants a percentage, if that company, just wants, a full-on payout, whatever it may be, they do. If they feel the game is worthy, they do that. Okay, is that a bad thing? I don't think so, because it could be a dev with 2 people, you know what I mean, or one person, you know what I mean. They've done this. Okay, like PUBG was like a huge experiment to them. Like, I remember playing PUBG, paying the $40 in preview, and enjoying it for like a whole year and a half. Like, I wouldn't go always, I wasn't religious about it, but I would enjoy it. And it was trash. And what it is now is incredible, and that's where they're putting out, hey, like, we're done with like the Xbox One stuff. We're gonna up res everything. We're gonna make everything look even better and play even better. These are the things we look for as gamers. And I think at the end of the day, if Game Pass does that for you, or the ability to say, like the free-to-play model's there, but for Microsoft, a lot of us look at Game Pass as a quote-unquote free-to-play model in a way, because we say, oh, we get all these games, and then, oh, Helldivers 2? Yeah, why not? I'll just, yeah. I mean, I haven't really bought a game in my head, just like any subscription service, like Netflix or something else. I haven't really bought a game in a while, or I just purchased the upgrade to said game, like, Avowed, purchased the upgrade. You know what I mean? Like, these are things that we're allowed to do because guess what? A lot of the revenue that these games make, at least the big games, it's all microtransactions. Okay? And you'll look at the free-to-play model, and that's how they make their money. Why is Fortnite still around? I wonder, Sean. Why
you don't
is
have
it
to
still
invest
around?
$1, dude. If you want to just the idea of pressing start on one of these games and just playing into your heart's content is how they get you, right? And I name them. And again, I only named 5. There are a lot more than out there. But the top 5 is, obviously you got your Minecrafts, you have your Roblox. Those are the 2 big ones. You got Warzone, which I know it's fallen off some, but it is still a big free-to-play game. And, of course, you have Fortnite and Apex Legends. These are what people are flocking to. This is what the industry has turned into. And what, to your amazing point, Crispy, he says all of these things about pricing of games and subscription services, and that hardware is going away when we know that it's not. And out of everything he had to say, it's all a moot point because he doesn't mention the reason these things are happening. More specifically, like, if you look at how Microsoft has reset themselves, OGs like us would have never guessed, if you would have given us 10 guesses 5 years ago, that Gears, Forza, and Halo will be on PlayStation. We would have called you a lunatic. You've heard me say this before, right? But they had to course correct, and because of the money they're making there, it makes up for the hardware they're not selling, which allows them to invest in hardware, right, for the future. So it's a cost and effect kind of situation.
So here's the worst part of this is Sean is so disconnected at this point from Sony that he doesn't see what they just did. They did a round table, just like the 4-game thing when we had to deal with it. They did the same thing. Okay, like the couches looked more comfortable. That's about it. Okay, the little, maybe they reclined at the end and they could just sit back and say, "Oh, I'm gonna sip my tea. I'm gonna get more stock." Because I'm telling you, like Sony's up around their 52-week high point for stocks right now. They continue to like hover around that already. So you look at that and you say, okay, he's just disconnected. He doesn't know what's going on because Sony's clearly very slowly adopting what they're going to do. But at the end of the day, like you look at what Microsoft's done, like the big ones are Forza and Gears. And we're talking about a 5-year-old game. And we're talking, actually maybe 6 now. And we're talking about a 20-year-old game. Okay. And you look at that and you say, can you make money off of your old games over on Xbox? Sure could.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way they're looking at it. And
they're going to do it.
You really look at the landscape. It's changing. And him himself said, AAA games are hard to budget for now. Didn't he say that?
He did.
He said it's somewhere around that aspect. I'm probably being nicer about it than I should. But all of a sudden you're going back on the. Maybe it's because you work for Tencent, sir.
Who's
Maybe
buying up the industry? P.S. By the way,
I don't know, man. I don't like somebody that talks out of both sides of their mouth. Don't be a hypocrite, and that's where I'll leave it.
well, it's a great point. The hypocrite part of the conversation is there. Again, I don't normally get the horns. Don't normally come out for me, Fuzzy Belvedere, for people's opinions because there are their opinions and they're entitled to them. I just think that someone that has been a part of the industry for as long as Sean Layden has, he's held some pretty prominent jobs within Sony. I don't know whether he's still there or he's not. I couldn't confirm. He held or is currently holding a prominent job with Tencent. When I see people of his stature come out and make these bombastic opinions, it almost seems like he's fishing to be hired. Right. So I don't know whether or not he's still there or he's not. But what I will say is that it's reckless. And I don't think he believes his own bullshit. I really don't. And why I do get aggravated and why I get frustrated with people who are supposed to know better is because he is a person and he's earned it. He ran a business and a very successful one for PlayStation for many, many years. So no one is suggesting that he hasn't earned the $1 million status, but we know that he has it. And what pisses me off, and I said this before, and I will reiterate it again for the class, is when someone has that many zeros in his bank account and you start to tell and give your ridiculous opinion about $80 games, the profit margins being very close to investment for these billion-dollar corporations, or who gives a shit, right? And then you're going to come out and you're going to say subscription services hurting the business. Never do you ever hear him come out and say subscription services good for the consumer because right now everything else is tough. Let's get your thoughts, man.
Where to begin? I'll start off by saying this. Anybody that's been in a C-suite position knows that the market changes from time to time. Every 5 to 10 years, your landscape of customer base can be completely different. So if you don't adjust with the times, you get left behind. Comparing Microsoft and Xbox to Sega at the time, I think it's a bit early to even mention those things. One, the backing of the company is a bit different as far as their financial access. And Microsoft is one of those companies that if things aren't, mathing, they're going to quickly cut those ties or sell it off or close up shop kind of thing. But as long as it's making money, they're going to continue to do things. Even when it's not making the intended money, but it's still somewhat profitable, i.e. the Surface laptops, they'll continue to make those because it is that Halo product to some extent for your lineup to act as a gateway for your customer base. Sure, there's the OEMs out there that they can make a ton of money off of with software and such, but having your own device is kind of that Apple-like presence, which not every company can pull off with every type of device. But all of that aside, the key things that he seems to have failed to recognize of why his exit with PlayStation probably came sooner rather than later is not only the managing of budgets for these dev teams and the costs that have skyrocketed for these AAA games, although some studios out there are better at managing their finances or keeping the scope within a reasonable amount. Whether you look at AA level teams like the ones that made Expedition 33, or what Obsidian's able to do, where they're able to reiterate with smaller teams making these smaller experiences in a faster turnaround time and staying within budget and not having things like feature creep really extend that cost, and also working within their own IP as opposed to necessarily licenses, especially when you're working with a licensed partner that's beating you over the head to influence you to give up the rights to Spider-Man. But that's a whole other story. The other key thing he ignores is that the $80 games is not the answer, because $70 games has definitely affected in a negative fashion this industry. Now, sure, things are more profitable than they've ever been, but it's not because of the $70 games. They are making more per game that they move, but they're moving less games. And it's not in the proportion that they had hoped, where if you just raise it $10, maybe you lose less than 10% of your sales. No, they've lost more like 40% of their sales with that $10 increase. If you look at when games were 60 versus now. So games sell a lot slower in comparison to the previous generation where they were $10 less. So if you're experiencing that, as well as a younger generation that are come accustomed to these free-to-play games where they just spend money on season passes and skins, that leaves the industry with a hole. And things like Game Pass are the workaround where you're actually getting more customers to experience these AAA games that they would have normally never looked at, because they're all about those free-to-play games. So if you give them a service where they can experience these games, and on occasion they'll pick up a game here and there, but because things are going up in price as far as not just the games, but groceries, rent, mortgage, whatever, people have to adjust accordingly. And that seems to be the thing he fails to understand, where you could raise prices to 80. Sure, you could get rid of subscription services. Well, then where does that leave the market? Do we have another crash like we did in the 80s at that point? Because if you already know the metrics, which you can follow Matt Piscatella as far as him telling you and going over the Circana info and data, more people or less people are buying games. More people are going with subscriptions. More people are spending money on microtransactions within the free-to-play games, because ultimately it feels like you're spending less money for the enjoyment time that you're participating in these black hole games like Fortnite, which is its own platform per se. So he's missing the mark on going with the more expensive games. I don't think that's the answer. I think having smaller games that are within a certain scope and stick to that budget would be the answer. That's kind of why he got thrown out on his ear. You can't go to the higher ups at Sony and say, yeah, we need another $350 million to make a Spider-Man 2.5 or Spider-Man 3. And the only way that we can recoup that cost is to break it up into 3 games, which, yeah, that goes along the lines of making a smaller experience. But if the entire game was a normal experience and you're breaking that up, it is going to feel like you're cheating the customer, hitting them over the head with, even if it's a lower price game at that point, with a $50 price tag, because they're going to ask for at least $50 at that point. It's not like it's going to drop down to 20 or 30 breaking it up, but it feels like he's either lost touch or didn't realize he was pretty much the demise of his own doing kind of thing. But when you look at subscription services in general, if it was that real unsustainable, I think they're beyond the acquisition aspect of when you're trying to accumulate as many subscribers as possible. I think they're satisfied with the amount that they have. Sure, they could, I'm pretty sure they would be over the moon with even more subscribers, but this is Microsoft. The same ones that got rid of Mixer, the same ones that got rid of the Zoom, the same ones that get rid of a ton of other programs or initiatives or parts of the company. Like, they could have been the better competition for Apple and the iPhone compared to Google with Android had they stuck with it. But no, they spent all that money on Nokia and decided, you know what? That was couch cushion money. Just close it down. So do you really think Xbox is going the way of the Dreamcast at that point, when they have so many other things that they've, for less of a reason that they've closed? I would think at this point, Xbox is viewed as a more of a staple at this point. Now, I could see them moving more into a streaming service, kind of like a GeForce Now, because the next piece of hardware, along with them selling the console, that chipset's going to be in the cloud.
Yes,
that chipset will be more of a rival for a GeForce Now type of experience, where the latency is lower, the visual fidelity is higher. That is probably where most of the industry is going to go, because I don't know if he's aware, $3,500 for a 5090 is a bit ridiculous. Sure, some of us can afford it handily, but a majority of us can't. And I know he has a lot of zeros at the end of his bank account, and that's fine. $3,500 is like a nickel to him in that regard. But for the majority of the masses that are going to be the customer base, that's not the case. And with that being said, at some point we're going to reach a point of not really no return, but we're going to reach a crux where the cost of this hobby is going to open up more people's eyes to the subscriptions that he's so against, or open up people's eyes more so to the free to play games that nobody really wants to talk about or dive into how that's negatively affecting the industry. Like, you don't have to spend a dime on a game, and you can have hundreds of hours in several of these free to play games. Sure, you may not have all the cool skins that you want, but you're still participating in gaming and taking up a lot of your free time. And that's basically what this hobby is: enjoying gaming in your free time. If you don't have to spend a dime to do it, well, how does the industry make money? And that's kind of where we need to come up with a better response or a better alternative to these free to play games. Something that's going to be just as appealing, but not break the bank, or not, be so much of a reach with it being an $80 price tag. I'm not saying we should have $20 games and just stick to Metrovanias and things like that. But I would say there should be more teams looking at smaller budgeted games, smaller experiences, or just look at subscription services, getting more people in the door that way. And then having it where if it's not a first party, it rotates out. So that way you sell it at a discount. It's kind of like the answer that Amazon has with streaming media. A lot of those movies you can actually buy. They're the closest, thing to like a Game Pass thing in the streaming service realm. When you look at Netflix, you're sure you can buy some of those series, but you're going to have to go to Best Buy or go to, the actual, studio that produced it to buy the disc set, if they even sell Blu-rays or anything like that. So I won't say he's completely out of touch, because obviously he's still, earning his keep over at Tencent, but it is a different industry than when he was holding the chair over at PlayStation. Things have changed. The consumer base has changed. Their spending habits have changed. And it's not just because of Game Pass. It's more so the free-to-play games that everybody is afraid to, talk about, because they might actually, expose their biases against, Game Pass in some extent. But I've rambled enough on it. But I think he just needs to be more in touch with the real causes or downfalls, I guess you could say, in gaming, where that is more of a blight than any subscription service could ever be. That's just my 2 cents.